We have with us Chetan Ahya, who's the Chief Asia Economist and Emerging Markets, Morgan Stanley, joining in from the sidelines of the Morgan Stanley India Investment Forum. Also joining us on the show is Lata Venkatesh. Thanks a lot, Chetan, for joining in. That really is the first question. The fact that a lot of people were worried that this general election outcome would, increase worries about increasing wealth redistribution, so to say, and maybe derail the path of infra development that we saw. Do you think that should be a fear now that most of the election outcome is out of the way? We have a lot of the key portfolios ministers continuing with their portfolios, and what's the way ahead?
No, we don't think so. So, look, I think, first of all, if you kind of look at the election results in more granularity, some of the states where we have seen, big support for the ruling coalition reflects that, it's not that there's a consistent message across the nation that poor people seem that things were not great for them in the last 5 years. So first of all, the message is not very clear to read. And that's evident that, if you think about the outcome in Orissa, in Madhya Pradesh and Bihar, you can sort of question the implication from some of the, market commentary that we're hearing, that the message is that it has to go more towards, the government has to go more towards redistribution. So that's the first point. The more important point is that we did this analysis on how the bottom 20% have seen improvement in their real incomes in different 5-year election cycles. And we found that in 2009 to 14, as well as between 99 and 2004, real incomes for the bottom 20% was just about 1.3%. And of course, we saw that after that 5-year period, both of them, 99 to 2004 and 2009 to 14, the incumbent governments suffered in the political outcome. And so the message that we read from the data is that if there is loss of macro stability, you have high inflation, and you don't have enough of investment growth and job creation, that is actually adversarial for the politicians or the policymakers who are in power at that point of time. So with that message, we think that the government should continue to stay on the path of investing, achieve moderate to high real GDP growth, and keep inflation in moderate level. And that's what will ensure that the bottom 20% per capita income or the income growth will be strong enough and bring them back to power.
Chetan, that's an extremely well-argued paper, both the inequality numbers you quote as well as the election data. But the rhetoric seems to have been gained by the regime seems to be that they need to be pro-poor. The first file the Prime Minister signed was Kisan Samman Nidhi, and the first policy decision was expanding PM Awas Yojana. So, what they ought to do is what you are arguing. But is there a very strong likelihood that they will not do that, but they will follow a more redistributive policy?
So, first of all, Lata, I think, it's not as if in the preceding 5 years there was not any redistribution spending. If you look at revenue expenditure for state plus center combined, or even if you just want to look at the central government, revenue expenditure to GDP is relatively high. The central government still runs a meaningful revenue deficit. So there was spending on redistribution, and the announcement that we have heard are part of that revenue spending that was ongoing. I don't think this means that revenue deficit or revenue spending as a percent of GDP will rise. There can be some shift in allocation towards housing, as they have already announced, away from something else. But the key question that we need to answer is that, is there going to be compromise on revenue deficit and revenue expenditure in aggregate away from that allocation towards capital expenditure? As you can see, the capital expenditure as percent of GDP for the central government has been going up quite nicely, and now it's at a 20-year high. Whether that kind of reverses, my answer would be that that will not reverse. Because of the big picture that I explained, that they understand that this is actually not going to help their political outcomes, because if you don't take care of the bottom 20% by keeping inflation low, then that is going to backfire. So I think both from the economics management perspective, as well as I think the political objectives of protecting the bottom 20%, it doesn't make sense to take any measure that eventually results into higher inflation.
When is the first cut from the FOMC and when is the first cut from RBI?
So for FOMC, we are assuming that they will begin to cut rates from September meeting onwards. That's on September 17th. And that's premised on the fact that we expect that the next 4 inflation prints will be implying that core PCE number, or personal consumption expenditure deflator, will be around 0.2% month on month, which would be annualized run rate of 2.4. And that would give the confidence to the Fed that we are now consistently achieving numbers which are below 2.5% on a sequential basis. And that's how they begin to cut rates from September. Okay. As far as RBI is concerned, we have taken out our rate cuts about 2 to 3 months back. And our framework on that one is that you have seen this pick up in investment to GDP and productivity growth, and that the real neutral rates are higher than what was perceived to be in 2022 when RBI had published this research paper talking about a 80 to 100 basis points real interest rates. We think now real rates should be assumed to be more closer to, or neutral real rate should be assumed to be more closer to 2%. And we're expecting inflation to go down to 4.5%, policy rates stay at 6.5% with 200 basis points of real neutral rates. The other thing is that, that paper which Dr. Patra had published in 2022 did mention that if you do have a leverage cycle and asset prices are rising, real neutral rates will be higher. And maybe the next monthly bulletin where they are going to talk about this will probably emphasize on that and indicate the market that real neutral rates need to be higher. And then just one final point on that, Lata, is that you have credit growth at 16.5%. and deposit growth is at 13%. How does RBI sort of give a message to the banking system, let me add some fuel to the fire, you accelerate credit growth, and guess what? I'm cutting policy rates, you cut deposit rate, even if you don't have your deposit growth matching credit growth. So that seems difficult for RBI to do, I think.
Okay, all right, Chetan, we're going to leave it on that note. A lot more questions, but completely run out of time. Thanks very much for joining in and speaking with us and talking about your outlook on the post-election scenario in India, as well as the FOMC and the RBI.